So here we are in the 30 Years' War. We've started moving into the 8th turn after dealing out some of the cards. What do we have? Both sides have taken two actions. The Protestants have been concentrating on taking Austria, and they played two intervention cards, including the valuable French one, 3-point card. France can't enter until Sweden enters first. The 3-point card seems valuable. The victory points were above 40, so trying to get those below seems of vital importance at this point, because 50, along with yeah, 50 victory points at the end of a turn is a Catholic victory. Whereas Munich, Vienna, and of course Brussels, between them constitute a Protestant victory. Now the Catholics have a problem. They've got, I don't know if I played it, they've got a card in their hand, and this was the same problem they had with the Wallenstein card. New leaders played with imperial units. There are no imperial units, and there's no chance of more without imperial leaders. Maybe a problem with the situation, with my play of the game, not understanding, if that's the case, that imperials, or most countries, when wiped out, just whatever cards give them more leaders aren't going to be of any value at this point. I'm not sure. It may be that there's cards in there that will bring imperial forces back on the map, but right now there's no imperial forces, there's no Bavarian forces. All we've got for the Catholics are the Saxons, who can switch sides, and the Spaniards, who can't cover most of the map. The Spaniards on their side, well, the Catholics on their side, moved good old John George and his Saxons into Dresden, where they were barely defeated, but both the Protestant and the Catholic leaders have been killed. So now the war there is one step closer to being unable to really be prosecuted. Alright, further. Not a lot happened in the rest of the turn. We're on to the 9th turn. Most things were paid for. I think the Protestants lost their remaining mercenary here in Dresden, and now they have a leader alone, which means they may want to do an initial free action to get him out of there. On the other hand, I didn't see much movement, any movement at all, really. The big cards had been spent. The Catholics actually had to throw a card away that was kind of valuable. They could have moved the Spanish army in the Netherlands, but no reason to. It's supplied there. They were able to pay for the supply for the Saxons, and one thing they did play was the French Huguenots revolt, which reduced the amount of points that France is willing to expend in the war by 4 per turn. That's pretty hefty, actually. That's there's a card that'll remove that from play that was in the early deck, I believe. However, this doesn't come out until the intervention. Interesting. Alright, on to the next one. And here we slide into the 10th turn, and essentially there's no war going on. I mistook and moved units I couldn't have. They had to leave some of these mercenaries somewhere, and I'm not sure where. I think they were in Linz when they should not have moved from the first point. There's a peasant revolt here in Vienna, which I haven't tried to extend. And other than that, there's a Bavarian, there's the siege in Bavaria. Munich has fallen now. The rest of Bavaria could be quick to follow. had peace between England and Spain, which takes away the points that, well, which restores the points in foreign aid that England would give. But, yeah, largely nothing's able to happen because the Catholics haven't been able to move a large enough force to actually siege Prague. So they didn't want to start that operation. See, the Protestants are building up an army back in Moravia now, but everybody's a three-movement factor with the exception of Cordoba. Most leaders are threes. Most of the action point cards won't move those leaders, so it's kind of tough. We saw the Dutch, a Dutch card played by the Spaniards. The Protestants could have played one that would have influenced it, but they chose to use that to fuel their siege of Bavaria. Right now, there's just very little going on in the war front. Mainly because there are no Catholic armies out there, and the armies that are out there, primarily the Protestant ones, just don't have the cards to keep moving. Alright, I took care of the siege, but I still have to take care of that peasant revolt. I don't know if it's spreading or not. I'll look up the rules and take care of that. Well, the decks have been reshuffled. We're still in the intervention period. That means the Swedish card has to be in the Protestant hand, and indeed it is. They played the Three Musketeers, though, to eliminate the Huguenot revolt. So France is no longer penalized by that. Unfortunately, I ran across a card in my hand, Emperor Maximilian. Restrictions on Bavarian and Imperial leaders stacking together are lifted. Oops. I had Bavarian and Imperial stacked together at one point. Certainly didn't seem to help the Catholics. But, well, I mean, maybe it did, but the effect hasn't been too conclusive on the game so far. Anyway, you know, when I look in the rules for the particular countries, yeah, the Imperials and Bavarians can't stack together. There's a lot of little special rules for the different countries. Didn't take the game seriously enough to really try to study this, even though I read through the rules kind of lightly for a week and then tried to read through them again. That does not seem to work well for me, and at this point in my life I don't seem to have the capability to sit down and really work the rules through. So if they're kind of this nature, which say Europa Universalis' rules are, I'm going to have trouble, as I have with this and with many of the new CDGs. Well, with the CDGs that I've looked at, most of which aren't all that new. It's just a pain for me, and I don't know what to do. About halfway through the turn, and we used, what, 1, 2, 3 actions each, so indeed halfway through. And we see two things. Cardinal Infante has marched up through the Tyrol, laid siege to Bavaria after driving whoever this Protestant replacement leader is. And at the same time, we got the Swedish army landing. Now, again, I'm being lazy with the rules. I'm not trying to look everything up. But I've just decided that counts as an intervention in Pomerania. So that cost a victory point for the Protestants. And currently, well, they don't own Stettin yet, but they have their supply base there. This will allow the Swedes, though, to move down and maybe take Brandenburg, maybe take out Saxony, who knows. Alternatively, they could, of course, violate Mecklenburg, but that doesn't seem very valuable. The Cardinal Infante has to make his way beyond the red line by the end of next turn, and there's a marker for that. If he doesn't, he and his army are destroyed. The Swedes are under no such limitations. So here we are at the end of the action phase of turn 10. I kind of jumped through things. Swedes came down, marching into Brandenburg, laid siege to Frankfurt an der Oder, and they also grabbed control of Pomerania. Cardinal Infante, after having successfully sieged Munich, had to find a way to get himself in supply, or else he was going to be in trouble. And the only way I could see that did not violate a neutrality and maybe gave him some advantages was to drop a siege on Würzburg, here in the Upper Palatinate. That puts him next to his line of communication, so he can draw supplies and pay for them. In terms of paying for things, both people played big cards. To fund that Swedish army, I need to drop a card that I kind of wanted to hold. The Saxony switches sides. That gives, 21 points, because I don't think there are any modifiers right now, except that the papacy isn't producing anything. That's still not enough to fund the entire Protestant army that's spread around, but at least I won't be making many rolls. And the next drop down was much, much lower, and I don't think would have been able to keep my Saxons and Swedish alive. For the Spaniard, well, yeah, pretty much Spaniards, they have 11, which is enough to fund, oh, I'm sorry, the Saxons were counted in on this, not the other side. That's not enough to fund their two armies, but the Saxons really aren't that strong a force to hold Gustavus off, so they may suffer for it. It seems more important to keep the Spanish armies in good shape. Alright, let me clean up the sieges. I'll be back for a moment and then we'll send this one up, I guess. Moving on to turn 11. Both sieges were unsuccessful, so they are at the +1 marker. This definitely slows down the action when this kind of thing happens, but that's okay. It's kind of exciting because there's actually stuff happening now. Of course, with the Spaniards pulling back, there's not much that the Catholics can do unless they get something else, or unless France comes into the game, because they just can't operate beyond this red line. And all I've got on the other side is a bunch of Saxons who really aren't very impressive at all. They're also taking losses, but they're mainly 1-point militia units. I got a 2-point full-strength militia unit there. I can't recruit more because they're out. Their army's there. Painful. Is there anything that can recruit anything weird? I was hoping that maybe, you know, the Saxons could recruit some Imperial units or something to get that faction back in play, as it were, the Bavarians back into play. It doesn't seem to be any way to do that. Once you lose your army, you lose that faction. It really looks like. The Swedes have some advantages. They can create Protestant militia or mercenaries, which isn't that big a deal because the Protestants have these leaders, new leader cards, that come in with troops and a leader, and it just happens. The Imperials don't seem, at least as of yet, to have things that just bring them new troops. Now, Cardinal Infante is an exception, but he can't do any recruiting. So I don't know how the Imperials are going to last. They would have probably been better off when they were around 40 victory points, offering a minor victory, because their prospects, from my view right now, are very, very limited. Unless there's something magical out there that's going to allow them to have troops over in the Imperial section, their cause is doomed. And had they offered a peace at above 35 points, the Protestants would have had to accept a roll on the table. Whether or not that worked, who knows? And it might have just been the delay that prevented, you know, more Catholic growth or whatever that allowed the Swedes to come in before any kind of repercussions. So, but it looked like that was the only point where the Catholics could have pulled off a victory from my view right now. Again, I don't know the cards, so. But definitely learning a lot about the game of this. All right, this one's going up.